The Prague Spring of 1968. What happened? The old Stalinist leader was ousted from Czechoslovakia, and the new leader was called DUBCEK, which sounds very similar to dubstep, but it's not dubstep, it's DUBCEK. He became the leader in 1967, and what he said he wanted was socialism with a human face. In other words, a friendlier form of what had been happening in Czechoslovakia. Make no mistake, DUBCEK was a committed communist. He thought communism was the right path, but he didn't want to follow the USSR model. So that is a cause number one of the Prague Spring of 1968. A further cause, linked to this, is that DUBCEK started to propose that there might be another party, another political party allowed in Czechoslovakia, which would have been called the Social Democratic Party. And that set off some warning bells or warning alarms around Eastern Europe, allowing other parties other than the Communist Party whatever next. A third possible cause, again linked to the fact that DUBCEK became the new leader and wanted socialism with a human face, was that he relaxed censorship. And that led to an outpouring of anti-communist writing, and communist leaders were even interviewed and grilled about how they ran the country live on television. So it's communists being open to being criticised. And maybe the biggest cause of, when all these things are all intertwined, aren't they? All intertwined with this DUBCEK and socialism with a human face. The fourth thing is that it worried Brezhnev, the new leader of the Soviet Union, and the rest of the countries in Eastern Europe, part of the Eastern Bloc. They all worried that this might actually happen to them. And also, Czechoslovakia had one of, if not the strongest industry in the Eastern Bloc, and they didn't really want to lose such a vital part of the Eastern economy. And all these things together came to cause a big crisis during the Prague Spring. I should explain what the Prague Spring itself is. If you think of spring, it's like the flowers coming up for the first time, things seem brighter, things are new. Well, that's why it's called the Prague Spring, Prague being the capital of what was Czechoslovakia. So the Prague Spring itself is what caused the crises, which is what we're about to find out about. What happened? What happened was, DUBCEK made it absolutely clear from the very start that he did not want to remove Czechoslovakia from the Warsaw Pact. He knew that this had appeared to be the reason, or at least was the given reason, for the Soviet intervention in Hungary. And he didn't want to give the USSR any excuse to invade and undo everything he was attempting. The USSR's tactic in response to this was to argue with him and try to slow down the changes. The Eastern Bloc tried to intimidate Czechoslovakia by doing really public military training exercises on the borders with Czechoslovakia, sort of like going, yeah, look what we're going to do to you if we have to, we're so hard, that sort of thing. Then in July there was a summit conference where DUBCEK agreed. They were saying to him, what are you talking about here, introducing a new party and all these relaxations and stuff, what are you thinking? DUBCEK agreed at this summit to bin his ideas for allowing this other political party, but he did insist that his other reforms would stay. Anyway, after the July conference, tensions started to ease. And then in August, the very next month of course, there was another conference. This time not much of note happened, except that there was a vague declaration that Czechoslovakia must keep political stability. And everybody went home, and it seems agreements had been made. But 17 days later, completely taking everybody by surprise, after that conference had ended, 17 days after the conference in August, the Warsaw Pact countries invaded Czechoslovakia. Those that invaded said that they'd been invited into Czechoslovakia by the leaders of the Communist Party to combat counter-revolutionaries. If I give you a translation here, that means anyone against the government. The Czechoslovakian government announced on radio that this was a violation of their territory and a hostile invasion. Oh, I wonder who I should believe. There was very little resistance to the invasion, perhaps because they'd been taken by surprise so much. And there was a lot of resistance, remember, in the Hungarian uprising. Saying that, there were 72 Czechoslovakians who did die in this invasion, and you can find images of Soviet tanks burning in the streets of Czechoslovakia. But relative to the Hungarian uprising, there was very little in the way of resistance. And to the consequences. One consequence was the Brezhnev Doctrine, and it's probably starting to become clear to you that the leaders in the Cold War, they loved a good doctrine. So Brezhnev Doctrine was that if there was any threat to socialism or the establishment of communism in any Warsaw Pact country, then that would be considered a threat to the whole of the Eastern Bloc and all of the Warsaw Pact countries. So all of the Warsaw Pact countries could join in to stop it. That's basically it. So any threat to the status quo, any threat to what was going on, they could all join in and stamp it out. Clearly now it had been proven once and for all, I mean this is the third example, more than third example really, just the third one on this page of the website, but it had been proven once and for all there was no way of allowing any relaxation of the harsh, repressive methods of the governments of Eastern Europe, which had been created and moulded to be like the Soviet Union. I mean, DUBCEK had even been a close friend of Brezhnev and still got nothing of what he wanted. DUBCEK had stated publicly and clearly that he had no intention of leaving the Warsaw Pact, and he'd agreed to a lot of the things asked of him at conferences, yet even without any excuse really to invade Czechoslovakia, the Warsaw Pact countries had made some excuse up and invaded anyway, saying that the Czechoslovakian government had asked them to do so. It didn't really fool anyone. So a further consequence of all this is the people of the countries of Eastern Europe, when given freedom to change, I mean, it became obvious that if they were given any freedom to change, they did attempt it immediately. And it was therefore obvious that the Eastern Bloc was held together without the consent of the majority of its citizens. And it was held together pretty much mostly with military force, if not entirely by military force. In Germany, force had been used in the uprising, and then a wall had been built. In Hungary, an invasion, and in Czechoslovakia, another invasion. If a Soviet ruler was to come to power and allow the relaxation of censorship and repression across Eastern Europe, then the evidence of the GDR uprising in Hungary and Czechoslovakia was that the Eastern Bloc would begin to disintegrate. It seems that way, doesn't it? Every time they give a bit of freedom, the people in the Eastern countries, they start to take as much freedom as they can possibly get, because they clearly don't like living as they are doing. There was always a chance of holding things together so long as the use of military force was there, but military force was incredibly expensive and it had to be paid for. We'll see later in the course in the 1980s, well in 1985, a man called Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the Soviet Union, and he did allow freedoms in Eastern Europe. And unfortunately for him and for many communists in the Soviet Union and elsewhere, the Soviet economy could no longer afford the massive Soviet military force. So there was freedoms and there was nobody there to enforce Soviet will. So the Eastern Bloc in the late 80s began to disintegrate. Anyway, back to this. In summary, the Czechoslovakian crisis was yet another example of a country trying to gain a small amount of independence from the USSR and from the rest of the Warsaw Pact countries, but it was denied again by the USSR military.